Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'll be sharing my thoughts on the final ever issue of the Walking Dead comic. There will be full spoilers from this issue as well as spoilers from the rest of the Walking Dead's comic book run, so please do keep that in mind. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. So what I'm about to say I have already posted on a community post on my channel previously in the week, so apologies for those who have read that because this intro is going to be me repeating what I've said previously, but for those of you who didn't read that or might have missed that, on Tuesday evening I finally decided to read through The Walking Dead Volume 31, which I've been putting off for a number of weeks, and I really enjoyed it. Now, Volume 31 ends at issue 186, I believe, and unfortunately before I read this volume, I'd already had it spoiled for me that Rick dies in Volume 192. So with there only being 6 issues to get to that point, and with me wanting to find out why Rick died, I decided just to blast through it all and catch up with the Walking Dead comics and be up to date. After I read issue 192, I had a quick Google of Rick Grimes' death just because I wanted to see the fan reaction to how it went down, see if it was divisive or not. And up popped all these links of news stories that broke about an hour previously saying that Kirkman had announced that issue 193 was going to be the last issue of The Walking Dead, and he'd even gone out of his way to make fake covers for 194 and 195 so no one would know. And I couldn't believe it, especially as I only just caught up with the series, and then Kirkman decides to finish it. Yeah, thanks mate for that. But yeah, I was shocked, and I'm sure a lot of people still are shocked. But despite it being unexpected, it kind of makes sense, I think. I think it's the right thing. I admire Kirkman's balls for finishing the story when he wanted it to instead of dragging it out forever, and as you'll see throughout this review as it goes on, I really enjoyed this ending. Now, I'm not one of these people who are glad that The Walking Dead ended because I hated the Commonwealth arc and thought the comic went downhill quality massively, because I would say that I actually probably enjoyed this arc more than most people did, because I've said in the past that I was really intrigued by the political and social commentary that Kirkman had featured in the comics, but even I could admit that The Walking Dead had kind of wrote itself into a corner where there was nowhere else for it really to go. To me, Rick's death signified the end of The Walking Dead. Now, I know there are some fans out there who would kill to have 100 more issues with Carl as the protagonist, but to be honest, this idea never really appealed to me. I mean, sure, it would be cool to see Carl all grown up and being a leader and seeing how he coped with it, but ultimately he'd probably just end up in situations that we'd already seen his father be in. He'd probably just go and meet new communities, see new bad guys, fight more herds of walkers, and it's been done countless times before, and I don't really need to see it again, so I think this was the right time to wrap things up. I mean, had Rick not died the way he did in the last issue, things in the Commonwealth looked like they were leading to a war, a civil war, with Rick leading one side and, you know, fighting against, I can't remember what the Commonwealth leader's name is now, that's really bad. Sebastian's mum. Anyway, it'll come back to me later. But yeah, I don't want to see another war. We've had so many wars, and The Walking Dead sort of got to this stage where it was just going around in circles. New community, meet the people, meet some new bad guys, move on to a new one, blah blah blah. And I think Kirkman knew that, so he decided to wrap things up before it got stale, and I think he did the right thing. But anyway, that's enough about the last issue and Rick's death. Let's talk about issue 193. Now, I expected, as I'm sure most people did, for there to be a time skip in this issue at some point, but I didn't expect it to start immediately on the first comic panel. The issue opens up with old man Carl, who looks an awful lot like his father, living life on what I think is Herschel's farm, because let's not forget, unlike the TV show, Herschel's farm wasn't destroyed in the comics, and he's all loved up with Sophia, and they have a baby, Andrea. Now, it was kind of weird seeing him and Sophia together, because on Tuesday I'd literally just read a chapter of which had him and Lydia talking together, and he was reassuring Lydia about how much he loved her and that they were monsters, but they're monsters together and only they appreciate each other, blah blah blah. Anyway, and I thought them two would spend the rest of their lives together, but obviously not. Turns out maybe Carl had enough of going out with a weird person who licks his eye socket and wanted to go out with someone a bit more normal. Anyway, what happens next is a walker roams onto Carl's land and he swiftly chops its head off with Michonne's katana. It turns out that the walker is property of Herschel Green, that being Maggie's daughter, and Herschel keeps walkers in a kind of travelling circus, and he goes around town to town showing people walkers. and his act is called The Walking Dead, which is kind of on the nose, but let's just go with it. It's revealed that walkers haven't set foot on the safe zone for over 10 years, and Carl even mentions that his daughter Andrea is 6 years old and she's never even seen a walker, so people will pay to see them because they're intrigued. They're, it's like a circus act to them, and it also means walkers are a valuable thing to have. And with walkers being a valuable commodity, if that's the right word, Cole ends up getting on the wrong side of the law for killing one of them. Let's just stop for a moment and quickly think about this, because the idea of Cole being told off by the 5-0 for killing a walker and walkers being paraded around towns in cages so people can come out and pay to see them sounds absolutely ridiculous, doesn't it? And well, that's because it is ridiculous. However, this all only seems ridiculous to us because we have been on a journey just as Carl has, and we know how dangerous these walkers are and what they can do, and I think that's actually a good thing. I mean, the fact that I went through the same set of emotions as Carl did during this issue made me connect with him more than probably any character I have done during the Walking Dead's run. It's not entirely unreasonable to assume that after a decade of not encountering walkers, people would become complacent to it. The majority of the people who live inside the safe zone are no longer scared of walkers because the safe zone is so huge and secure, and as I said earlier, there's a sort of a new generation of kids who have never even seen walkers before. They haven't been through what Carl went through as a child. It makes sense then that they would see these walkers as some kind of novelty act, something to be viewed at from behind a cage. But then it also makes sense that Carl, someone who knows what walkers are like, would think that this is incredibly naive and an irresponsible thing to do. And he would even, he even say that it's actually quite disrespectful for it to Rick and all those who have died from walkers to be treating them as a joke. And seeing these walkers paraded around like some kind of exotic animal isn't something that Carl can live with. So instead of replacing the walker like he's told to do so in the court, he actually goes and kills all the walkers that Herschel has left. And as a result of this, he ends up being taken to the Walking Dead's sort of equivalent of the High Court and is put in front of Judge Michonne. And no, I'm not making this up. The final issue of The Walking Dead doesn't have any climactic battles or any deaths at all, but it does have 2 court cases, which is what we all wanted, right? Jokes aside, it does somehow work, and the reason being is that rather than this issue being a sort of climactic final issue, I see it as more of an epilogue. We've already had the big sort of character deaths with Dwight and Rick dying in the last 10 or so issues, and we've had enough battles to last a lifetime, so The Walking Dead doesn't need to end on a big bang finale or with every character dying. It just ends with a thoughtful ending, which I appreciate. Of course, this is just my personal opinion. Some of you might have wanted to see a final herd of walkers or a climactic final battle, but for me, I'm glad it ended the way it did. Anyway, long story short, Carl makes a very good speech whilst on trial, which then convinces Michonne to outlaw the ownership of walkers, and that's after Michonne herself makes a rather poignant speech about everything they've been through, and yeah, Carl manages to get away with it. When I say get away with it, he didn't really do anything wrong, did he? He just killed the undead. Michonne and Carl have a nice little catch up before then Carl heads off home. The Walking Dead then ends with Carl in a rocking chair with his daughter Andrea on his lap, and he reads a story which is all about the exploits of Rick and his friends, and it's about how they overcame the walkers and basically won and ended up where they are. Whilst this is happening, the comic panels veer off to different characters and locations whilst Carl carries on doing the narration, and there's some really sweet scenes mixed in with some rather sad ones as well. Amongst the highs of seeing Princess and Mercer walking down the street hand in hand and seeing an older Aaron and Jesus still together, we also see old Negan laying flowers at Lucille's grave, and we see Rick's grave next to Andrea's. We also get to see Sebastian and his mother still rotting away in prison, which is extremely satisfying. Carl finishes the story and his daughter smiles at him and asks him if he can read it again, and that's the end of The Walking Dead. It's a happy, beautiful ending which also reminds us of all those we've lost along the way. Yes, okay, I know that having a character read a story about all their events that they've been through and all their friends' events that they've been through at the end is quite a cliche way to end things, but for me that doesn't matter because it worked. I'm sure this ending is going to be pretty divisive because most people hadn't expected The Walking Dead to have a happy ending. I mean, I didn't, and there's some people out there who actually probably don't even want The Walking Dead to have a happy ending. And that's fair enough if you feel that way, but like Kirkman said in his letter at the end of the issue, a sort of an ending where everyone dies, it might be a different and unpredictable, but it's not going to be very satisfying, and I tend to agree with him. In fact, Kirkman mentions how he had originally planned to end The Walking Dead when Rick sort of took over Alexandria, and there would just be an ending of Alexandria being overrun by walkers and a statue of Rick Grimes, but in the end it would basically be for nothing because the dead have won, and this would mean we also wouldn't even see the Whisperers and Negan, and it's a rather bleak and, in my mind, quite a pointless ending. I've seen some people say, oh, this is a really cool way to end things, why didn't you do it? But can you imagine a reaction to that if you read the comic and it was just, the story just ends, everyone's dead, the dead rule the earth? Fantastic. What a waste of my life that was. I mean, The Walking Dead has had some pretty disturbing shit happen during its run, more so in the comic series than in the TV show. For example, we've had sort of Michonne's been raped and then she took it out on the governor and screwed him up even more. We've had kids killed at the prison by some serial killer who chopped their heads off, kids killing kids. We've had cannibals, we've had Glenn getting his brains bashed in, and so much more. There's been so much nasty stuff going on in The Walking Dead. And then if after all that the ending was just more nasty shit, it would have felt kind of pointless, or at least to me anyway. The Walking Dead would have just been a comic about characters being tortured and abused, and it would have ended with them being tortured and abused some more. Some of you may have wanted things to end like that, but for me personally, I'll take this cliche happy ending over it every single time. I have seen some criticism thrown at this ending around the fact that some storylines appear not to be finished. I've seen some questions of people saying, oh, what's happened to the Sanctuary? How did Lydia get with Connor? Where's this character? Where's, this character, for example? What about this other alliance that was alluded to in this issue, etc, etc. Now, I completely understand if you're pissed off because your favourite character's story arc, in your opinion, hasn't been finished or resolved, or, other things haven't ended properly, and I won't ever say to anyone that's wrong to think that way, but for me personally, I couldn't care less. For example, I saw someone say, oh, what happened to the Sanctuary? We'll never know what happened to the Sanctuary. But personally, I couldn't give a shit what happened to the Sanctuary. There's no one there I care about anyway. I don't need to know the ins and outs of the Sanctuary and what's happened during this time, given who's their leader now and who's under it and all their internal struggles. I don't need to know that. Another question I saw brought up is, well, what happened with the fallout after Rick's death at the Commonwealth? And some people feel that this ending sort of moved too quickly and we didn't get to see that, but we know what happened. We saw Sebastian and his mum are still in prison, and that the Commonwealth people sided with Rick and took over. I don't need to see, again, like with the Sanctuary, I don't need to see how it came to be and everything that happened. It doesn't need to be done. I can fill in the blanks, and the stuff that I can leave to imagination. I don't need every single thing wrapped up. I don't need to know what happened to character X, Y, and Z, and I don't need to know what this side character is doing and how many kids he's got and where he's working and what food he likes to eat. I think some people, in their mind, closure is having every single question possible answered, and I don't think you need that. As I said earlier, to me, The Walking Dead's reached its natural conclusion. I don't need 100 more issues of Carl fighting against more communities and, all that kind of stuff. It's got to the point where I think this is the perfect time to wrap it up. It's well known that The Walking Dead isn't your average zombie story. Our characters aren't centred on finding a cure and trying to save the world. It's just about ordinary people trying to survive. And with that kind of storyline, it can carry on indefinitely. There's the risk that it can just turn into a soap opera and keep going on and on and on. But obviously what comes with that is that it can get a bit boring and you just keep doing the same thing all the time. And to be honest, I do think The Walking Dead was getting to the point that if it did carry on and there was another war in the Commonwealth and then more communities, it would just outstay its welcome. Rick's death prevented a war from happening. It caused what we saw in this issue to came to be. He'd finally achieved peace, and I'm happy with that. I'm not saying that this ending was absolutely perfect, because there were some things that got on my nerves. I mean, for example, I was kind of annoyed to see that Herschel Jr. was an absolute little shit and that Maggie Green was a bad mum, because I would never see Maggie being a bad mum and ignoring her parental duties for a job, because this is, let's remember, this is Glenn, who she adored, Glenn's son. She would have done everything for him, but hey, that's obviously what Kirkman's vision was, but yeah, I didn't really like that. And I also do think there was a bit too much Rick worshipping going on. I mean, of course, the guy, he had a huge impact on what happened, and you know, was probably one of the main reasons why there was all peace and he defeated Negan and everything he'd done. That's fair enough, but a lot of the characters were acting like he was this saviour sent down from heaven to save everyone, and that he was this infallible, perfect guy, when in fact he's not. He's done a lot of bad shit during his time. I guess this sort of was referenced in a way by Carl when he saw Rick's statue, and he said like, oh, his chest wasn't puffed out like that, that's not how he looked, and he sort of made the point that people were making Rick out to be more heroic than he actually was. So at least the book referenced it, I guess. Apart from those minor complaints though, there's not really a lot else that I disliked about it. I know this ending wasn't for everyone, but for me it was all the closure that I needed. And yes, it may have been the cliche happy ending, but for me it's what the characters deserve. I'm happy to see Carl reading a book to his daughter and everyone living a peaceful, happy life, and I can just imagine in my head that these characters are, you know, living out the rest of their days peacefully. I don't need to have another group or another bad group on the horizon. For me, it's a solid ending. So yeah, I really liked it. I mean, obviously it's a bit upsetting to see one of your favourite comics end, but it's a good way to go, and I think it's kind of good now that the TV show has a base to sort of end on. Whether or not it does or not and just carries on for forever though is another thing. But yeah, pleasantly surprised, because endings are not a good thing to do. Are not an easy thing to do. Sorry, we've seen with Game of Thrones how bad endings can go, and a lot of the time, ending something is the most difficult thing to do, as you can see here by the fact that I'm rambling on and don't really have any more scripts because I don't think I finished writing it. But hey, Walking Dead, it's finished. I like the way it finished. Let me know if you like the way it finished. Let's stop saying the word finished. Alright, anyway, cheers. Let me know in the comments below. Did you like this video? Did you like the Walking Dead books? What am I talking about? I don't know. And yeah, let me know. As always, don't know what I'm talking about anymore. Getting too tired and hot. Right, anyway, better go. See you later, people. Bye.